Thank you, Jean. And I would like to thank the organizers of this wonderful and very important meeting for inviting the European Rhinologic Society to talk about upper airways here and try to impose how important the upper airways are in this whole problem. This is a picture you will all recognize and probably never remember. It is September 11, 2001, a terrible tragedy, but also an enormous outburst of pollutants. And the people who so bravely tried to save lives there still suffer from that outburst of pollutants. You can see here what happened. These people who had a normal prevalence of about 10% of chronic rhinosinusitis had a 4 times increase in chronic rhinosinusitis. And what is chronic sinusitis? Imagine how you feel the 3rd day of a serious cold. You're all blocked up, you have a headache, rhinorrhea and sneezing, and you feel extremely unhappy and unhealthy. That's how these people, 40%, a third to 40% of these firefighters now feel every day, and probably will feel for the rest of their life. They don't die of it, but there is an enormous impact on their quality of life. And you can nicely see in this graph that the people with the highest exposure to pollutants, the blue line, have the highest prevalence of disease, and the people who came a little bit later have a little bit less. So a clear indication that actually this pollutants is the cause of their disease. Is it only the upper airways? No, you can see here that also their lung function is measured over time, and also in the lower airways there's a significant increase in disease, but not as important as in the upper airways. When you think of the nose, many people think that the nose is this little thing. But that's absolutely not true. Actually, the nose and the sinuses are huge. The nose is about this part of the head. So if you think of your own head, your nose is until your ears, and the sinuses are from within your brain until your mouth. So it's a large volume of mucosa and a large volume that can be diseased and gives a lot of trouble in your head. Imagine a large tennis ball full of pus in your head, how that feels on a daily basis. If we look at nasal and sinus disease, this is a nice overview where you can see that the nose and the sinuses are very much interlinked. Allergy plays an important role, but many patients have non-allergic disease. And in the sinuses, we have patients with polyps, which is a sort of separate entity, and patients without polyps. But all these are interlinked, and many patients have more than one form of disease. The same is true in the lower airways already from 2000 that we started with ARIA, Professor Bousquet and Professor Kotayev started with ARIA. We have understood how important the relation between the upper and the lower airways is. And here you see that various forms of upper airway disease also have their counterpart in the lower airways. So already we heard a number of times today what sort of pollution we encounter in daily life. Personal pollution within our houses, but definitely also smoking and secondhand smoke, occupational pollution, and probably, definitely for today, the most important, the environmental pollution that we encounter in our daily lives when we are outside. And it's important to realize that our nose and sinuses is the air conditioner of the body. So all the air goes through the nose, hopefully, and the nose takes about 90 or 95% of all the particles that we breathe in are taken out by the nose and sinus, and in that way do not reach the lungs. So it's very important to keep that part of our breathing system healthy. If we look at the data, we see that compared to the lower airways and other forms, there is an enormous lack of data of the impact on the upper airways, and that's definitely something we have to work on. But we're pretty sure that active and passive smoking have an important role in allergic, but definitely also in non-allergic rhinitis. And there are good studies done in the last 10 years, mostly financed by the EU, in the Galen project to look at chronic rhinosinusitis and showing that their smoking and ex-smoking has an enormous impact and an odds ratio of about 2. If we look at allergic rhinitis, there is a clear association with traffic pollution, and for non-allergic rhinitis the data are more limited, but also with some forms of traffic pollution. Here is a study we did in the Netherlands already some while ago, where we looked at patients with non-allergic rhinitis and tried to predict which forms of environmental pollution had an impact on the symptoms. And we followed these patients for 200 days and asked them every day to fill in a questionnaire, and we measured the amount of pollution they saw that day. And made a nice calculation which pointed to especially ozone and NO as a very important contributor to the symptoms. And also temperature, as you can see here, these are the controls who didn't have any symptoms. Here the patients with non-allergic rhinitis, and you see that there is a very clear opposite correlation to the temperature they encountered in the Netherlands, where temperatures are quite moderate compared to here, for example. I tried to find the data on chronic rhinosinusitis, and that was a not very good experience, because there was until 2015 only one paper on the effects of the environment in chronic rhinosinusitis, so a big lack of knowledge at the moment, and we cannot say very much, and we definitely need more data. There's a little bit more about occupational risk, and I will come to that in a minute. We tried within that same EU Galen project to look at the impact of environmental pollution in the Netherlands, but in this 15,000 subject analysis, we couldn't show differences. We tried 2 places around Amsterdam where we expected to have much more pollution than in the east of the Netherlands, but couldn't show. Probably the reason is that we have to have data that are much more geolocalized than just a certain region to be able to prove that. If we go back to occupation in that same cohort, but now in Sweden, they looked at occupational exposure and showed a clear correlation with a number of different occupational exposures, like paper dust, cleaning agents, moisture, and encounter with animals. And maybe even more clear example of what occupational exposure can do is this study from our chairman today, Professor Hellings, looking at the number of times patients are operated for chronic rhinosinusitis. And here on the left cartoon, you see the number of times patients were operated. And I can assure you, if you're operated a number of times, you have very severe disease. And if you're operated only once, the disease is not so bad. So here, people who had more than 3 surgeries in their life for chronic rhinosinusitis. And then he looked at the occupational exposure, and you can see that there is a very clear association between the two. The more times you're operated, the more severe your disease is, the more occupational exposure the patient experienced. I told you already that active and second-hand smoking is giving a significant increase in the risk of chronic rhinosinusitis, the same for occupational exposure, but we need more data about environmental exposure to be sure what the role is exactly there. So to summarize, what I wanted to tell you is that all forms of pollution, whether we talk about environmental, personal pollution, especially smoking or occupation, have significant impact on the upper airways, both giving rise to rhinitis and chronic rhinosinusitis. And at this moment there is an advertisement in China where they say, if we do not change pollution, pollution might change us. And we will all grow these massive nasal hairs to prevent pollution coming into our body. I hope we will be the survivors of this pollution age and that we will not need all these hairs to prevent pollution killing us. And finally, just like Joanna, I would like to invite you to a meeting where there will be a lot about upper airways, and I think many of you should know more about upper airway disease, and it's the European Rhinologic Society meeting in April in London. Thank you very much.